a widow tortured into marrying an old outlaw until a Navajo warrior saves her. Maria sat on the worn wooden porch of her small homestead, staring at the horizon where the sun was slowly sinking behind the distant hills. The sky glowed in shades of gold and pink, but even the beauty of the sunset could not chase away the heavy sorrow that weighed on her heart. It had been 3 months since her husband Tomas had been taken from her. He had died in a raid by a gang of ruthless outlaws who roamed the New Mexico territory, leaving destruction in their wake. Maria's world, once full of love and laughter, had become a quiet and lonely place. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, and Maria could hear the faint rustle of leaves, as if the land itself mourned with her. Her daughter, little Isabella, played nearby, building a small castle from stones and sticks. Maria smiled faintly at her daughter's innocence. Despite the harshness of their lives, Isabella's laughter was a small light in the darkness of Maria's grief. But even that small joy could not hide the fear that lingered in Maria's heart. Life as a widow on the frontier was never easy, and Maria had learned this the hard way. Tomas had been her rock, teaching her how to tend the land, care for the animals, and keep their home safe from wandering animals or wandering strangers. Now, with him gone, Maria had to face the hardships alone. Every morning she would wake before the sun and start the long list of chores that kept their homestead running. She fed the chickens, milked the goat, drew water from the well, and tended the small vegetable garden that Tomas had worked so hard to plant. Each task reminded her of her loss, yet she carried on because she had no choice. The territory they lived in was rough. Outlaws and bandits moved from town to town, taking what they wanted without fear of punishment. The law was weak, and those who tried to defend themselves often paid with their lives. Maria had heard stories from neighbors who had been robbed, beaten, or even killed. She tried to stay hidden, keeping the doors locked and the windows shuttered, but the fear was never far. Each creak of the wooden floors, each distant sound in the night, made her heart race. She had learned to listen carefully to every sound, to notice every shadow, because survival depended on vigilance. Even with all her care, Maria could feel the eyes of strangers watching her. People in the small nearby town whispered about her, some out of sympathy, others out of curiosity or malice. Being a widow made her vulnerable, and Maria knew that danger often came not only from known outlaws, but also from those who saw weakness and sought to take advantage of it. She tried to avoid the town whenever possible, preferring the quiet solitude of her home. Yet isolation brought its own challenges. Maria often felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. Nights were the hardest, when Isabella slept and the house was silent, and Maria had only her memories and fears to keep her company. Despite the sorrow and fear, Maria was not weak. She had learned to be strong in ways that were quiet and steady. She remembered the lessons Tomas had taught her, not only practical skills but also the importance of courage and perseverance. She had learned to make decisions for herself, to stand firm even when the world seemed cruel and unfair. Maria understood that survival was not only about avoiding danger, but also about facing it with a clear mind and a brave heart. Every day, she reminded herself that she must keep going, not just for herself, but for Isabella. One afternoon, as Maria was repairing a broken fence, she noticed a figure on the horizon. The sun glinted off something metallic, and Maria's heart skipped a beat. She froze, her hands gripping the wooden post tightly. The figure was riding slowly toward her homestead. Maria could not see the face clearly from this distance, but something about the way he moved made her uneasy. She quickly ushered Isabella into the house, closing the door quietly behind them. The rider approached with a deliberate pace, and as he drew closer, Maria saw that he was an older man, with a weathered face and a long coat that had seen better days. His eyes were sharp and calculating, scanning the land as if it belonged to him. Maria's stomach sank. She had heard stories about men like this, men who believed they could take what they wanted from others without consequence. Her heart pounded as she realized that her fears might not be unfounded. The man dismounted near the edge of the property, letting his horse graze. He did not call out, but Maria could feel his presence, heavy and threatening. She peered through the window, keeping herself hidden as she tried to understand his intentions. The man's gaze lingered on her house, then on her, and Maria felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew instinctively that this was no ordinary traveler. He was an outlaw, and she was his next target. For hours, Maria stayed inside, watching him from behind the curtains. She could hear him speaking softly to himself, muttering words that made her skin crawl. He seemed to be deciding something, and Maria feared that it might be her fate. She thought of Thomas and how he would have protected them, and a wave of grief washed over her. Yet amidst the fear, Maria felt a spark of determination. She would not give up without trying. She would protect herself and Isabella as best as she could. As evening fell, the man made his move. He walked to the door and knocked, a slow and deliberate rhythm that echoed through the quiet homestead. Maria's heart raced, and she hesitated, unsure whether to answer. She knew that any action could be dangerous, yet she also knew that hiding indefinitely was impossible. She took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping herself just out of reach. The man's voice was rough and commanding. He introduced himself as Don Miguel, a notorious outlaw whose name brought fear to the region. Maria felt a chill run through her body as he spoke. He made it clear that he expected her to comply with his demands, using threats veiled as instructions. He wanted her to marry him, claiming that she had no choice, and made it clear that any refusal would put her and Isabella in danger. Maria's mind raced. She thought of her options, but the truth was grim. She was alone, with little support and no protection. The surrounding community was too intimidated to intervene, and the law offered no guarantee of safety. Maria felt a mixture of fear, anger, and desperation. She realized that her life had changed forever, and that she would need every ounce of courage to survive the coming days. Even as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Maria did not give in to despair. She remembered the lessons of strength and resilience Tomas had taught her. She knew that she would have to face this challenge carefully, using her wits and her courage to protect herself and her daughter. Though the path ahead was uncertain and dangerous, Maria felt a small flicker of hope that she could endure and find a way through the darkness. That night, Maria lay in bed with Isabella beside her, listening to the wind and the creak of the old house. Her mind could not rest, filled with worry and plans. She whispered softly to Isabella, promising that everything would be all right, even if she herself did not fully believe it yet. She understood that survival required vigilance, courage, and determination. Maria knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she was not completely without hope. Somewhere, she felt, help might come, even if it was far away or unexpected. As the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Maria closed her eyes and made a silent promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to protect her daughter and preserve their home. She would face the fear, endure the hardships, and wait for a chance to regain control of her life. Though the days ahead would be filled with uncertainty, Maria's spirit remained unbroken. She was a widow, yes, but she was also a mother, a survivor, and a woman who refused to be defeated by circumstance. The morning sun broke over the horizon, spilling warm light across the dry, rugged landscape. Maria could feel the weight of the previous night pressing down on her chest, a constant reminder that her life had changed forever. She had barely slept, her mind swirling with fear and worry. Isabella, still young and unaware of the danger that lurked nearby, had slept peacefully, but Maria had kept one eye open, listening for every sound outside. The world felt different now, harsher and more uncertain. Don Miguel, the outlaw who had arrived at her homestead the night before, was still there. His horse was tethered near the edge of the property, and Maria could see him moving about, checking the perimeter as if he already owned the land. Every motion he made sent a shiver down her spine. She knew that refusing him could bring dire consequences, yet the thought of surrendering to his demands filled her with anger and sadness. Her life, which had been hard but steady with Tomas, now felt like it had been stolen from her in an instant. Maria tried to keep busy, tending to the animals and preparing breakfast, but each sound made her heart race. The chickens clucked nervously, the goat bleated, and the wind carried the faint sound of Don Miguel's voice as he muttered to himself outside. She kept her movements slow and deliberate, hoping to avoid drawing attention. Her daughter played quietly nearby, and Maria forced herself to smile, even though her heart ached. She could not let Isabella see her fear. It would only make the little girl anxious and confused. By midday, Don Miguel came to the door, knocking with the same slow, deliberate rhythm as the previous night. Maria's stomach twisted in fear as she opened the door just enough to see him clearly. His eyes were sharp and cold, studying her like a hunter assessing his prey. "You cannot hide from what must be done," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of threat. Maria's hands clenched the doorframe and she tried to steady her voice. I will not do anything I do not want," she said, though her heart pounded in her chest. Don Miguel's smile was thin and unfriendly. "You misunderstand," he said. "I am giving you a choice that is not really a choice. You will marry me or you will suffer the consequences. You have no protection here. I hold the power, and your life, and your daughter's life rests in my hands." The words were like ice in Maria's veins. She had heard of men who used fear to control others, but hearing it directly, knowing that her life and Isabella's life depended on her compliance, made the danger very real. Maria wanted to protest, to refuse, to find some way to fight back, but as she looked around her small homestead she realized how isolated she truly was. The nearest neighbors were too far to hear her cries, and even if they did, they were unlikely to intervene against a man as feared as Don Miguel. The law offered little comfort, officials were few, and justice often came too late. Maria's mind raced as she considered her options. Escape seemed impossible, but submission felt like giving up the little control she still had. For the next few days, Don Miguel stayed at the homestead, making his presence felt in subtle ways. He moved through the property as if he owned it, checking the animals, the fences, and even the vegetable garden. He spoke occasionally to Maria, giving instructions that were intended to be obeyed without question. Maria obeyed, not because she wanted to, but because she knew that any resistance could be dangerous. Her life and Isabella's depended on her caution and patience. Despite the fear and tension, Maria tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She continued her daily chores, fed the animals, and prepared meals. She spoke to Isabella gently, ensuring that the child felt safe and loved, even when Maria herself felt a storm of fear and uncertainty. Maria reminded herself that her strength was not just in survival, but in protecting her daughter's innocence and sense of security. Each day she held on to that small purpose, and it became a shield against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Maria also observed Don Miguel carefully. She noticed the way he moved, the patterns in his behavior, and the moments when he seemed distracted or vulnerable. She knew that understanding him might be her only chance to survive or find a way to escape. She did not trust him, but she studied him quietly, learning to anticipate his moods and reactions. In her mind, she began to formulate small strategies, small steps she could take to protect herself and her daughter, though she knew she would need patience and careful planning. The days passed slowly, each one bringing new challenges. Don Miguel's presence was oppressive, and Maria felt the constant tension in her chest. Yet she refused to let despair consume her. She found small moments of strength in caring for Isabella, in tending the animals, and in maintaining the homestead. These simple tasks, though they seemed ordinary, became acts of defiance, reminders that her life had not been entirely stolen. Maria understood that courage could be quiet and steady, as much in surviving the day as in grand gestures of heroism. One evening, as the sun set and the sky filled with shades of orange and purple, Don Miguel approached Maria with a proposition. He expected her to accept his terms willingly, though Maria's heart rebelled at the thought. She listened quietly, keeping her face calm, even as fear and anger surged within her. Don Miguel's words were smooth but threatening, designed to convince her that resistance was useless. Maria forced herself to breathe deeply, to keep her mind clear. She knew that outward compliance might be the only way to protect Isabella until an opportunity presented itself. That night, Maria sat in the small kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of warm tea. Isabella slept peacefully in the next room, unaware of the tension that filled the house. Maria's mind was full of plans and worries. She thought of her husband Tomas and the life they had shared. She thought of the lessons he had taught her about courage, patience, and strategy. Though Tomas was gone, his guidance remained in her memory, helping her navigate the dangerous path that now lay before her. Maria also began to think about the wider world beyond her homestead. She remembered stories she had heard of people who had faced similar dangers and survived. She considered the possibility that help could come from unexpected places, that courage and wisdom might not be hers alone. The thought gave her a small spark of hope, even as the reality of Don Miguel's control pressed heavily upon her. She understood that survival would require not only strength, but also careful observation, planning, and timing. Over the next few days, Maria carefully mapped out her routine, noting Don Miguel's movements and habits. She made small adjustments to her chores, finding ways to keep herself and Isabella safe. She taught Isabella to stay close and quiet, explaining in gentle terms why they had to be careful. Maria also found moments to rest, to gather her strength, and to maintain her sense of purpose. Each small victory, each act of careful planning, became a building block in her resilience. Despite the fear, Maria's spirit remained unbroken. She refused to let the outlaw's threats dominate her mind completely. Instead, she focused on survival, protection, and the possibility of freedom. Each day was a test of patience and courage, and Maria faced it with determination. She knew that one day an opportunity would come, and she intended to be ready. Until then, she would endure, quietly and carefully, for the sake of her daughter, and for the hope that someday life could be reclaimed. As the sun rose and set each day, Maria continued her quiet struggle, tending the homestead, protecting Isabella, and observing Don Miguel Viata. Her life had changed dramatically, but she refused to surrender entirely. She carried the memory of Tomas, the lessons he had taught, and the hope for a better future as she navigated the dangers of the present. Though the path ahead was uncertain, Maria's courage, intelligence, and determination became her shield against fear and oppression. Maria had learned that survival was not just about avoiding danger, but also about using one's mind and heart to navigate challenges. She understood the importance of patience, observation, and careful decision-making. Each day was a test, and she faced it with quiet strength, determined to protect her daughter and herself. Though Don Miguel remained a constant threat, Maria's resilience grew stronger with each passing day. She knew that courage could be quiet, steady, and unyielding, and she drew upon that strength as she faced the difficult days ahead. The days passed slowly for Maria and Isabella, each one filled with tension and quiet fear. Don Miguel remained at the homestead, watching their every move, his presence a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Yet Maria refused to let despair dominate her. She moved carefully through her chores, always alert, always thinking ahead. She watched Don Miguel's patterns, learning when he would leave the property for supplies or to patrol the surrounding land, and she began to plan small ways to protect herself and Isabella. Every day her mind worked like a sharp blade, cutting through fear to find practical steps for survival. One early morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Maria noticed a figure on a ridge in the distance. At first she thought it might be one of Don Miguel's men, coming to check on the homestead. But something about the figure seemed different. The person moved with quiet confidence, their posture calm and purposeful. Maria squinted, trying to make out the details, but the distance was too great. She felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. Could this be a new threat, or might it be a stranger who could help? The figure came closer over the next hour, moving through the rugged terrain with ease. Maria could see now that it was a man, tall and strong, with the lean build of someone accustomed to the wilderness. He carried a simple pack and a long staff, and his movements were careful, deliberate, as though he did not want to be noticed until the right moment. Maria's heart raced. She did not know if he was friend or foe, but something about his calm presence felt different from the oppressive energy of Don Miguel. As the man approached the homestead, Maria stepped back from the window, keeping herself hidden. She watched as he stopped at the edge of the property and raised a hand in a gentle gesture of greeting. His eyes were kind but alert, scanning the surroundings with intelligence and caution. Maria's mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps this was someone who could help her, someone who could challenge Don Miguel's control. She felt a small flicker of hope, fragile but real, deep in her chest. The man's voice when he spoke was soft but firm. "I mean no harm," he said. "I have been traveling through this land and heard of troubles in this area. I am here to see if I can help." Maria's eyes widened. Could she trust him? She remembered the lessons Thomas had taught her about judging character carefully, observing actions more than words. Yet, in her heart, she felt that there was honesty in his tone, a quiet strength that contrasted with Don Miguel's threatening presence. Over the next few days, the man, whose name Maria learned was Taya, visited the homestead cautiously, always keeping his distance until he earned her trust. He did not intrude, but offered small gestures of kindness, bringing news of nearby towns and observing the land for dangers. Maria found herself studying him as carefully as she studied Don Miguel, noting Taya's calm confidence, his respect for boundaries, and his clear purpose. She began to feel a sense of relief that was unfamiliar in these harsh times, a sense that perhaps someone could help her regain control of her life. Taya had been traveling alone, guided by a strong sense of justice and a deep knowledge of the land. He had heard stories of Don Miguel and his band of outlaws, and he knew that the homesteads in the area were vulnerable. Taya was skilled in survival and in defending the innocent, and he moved with a quiet efficiency that made him a formidable presence. He observed Maria's situation carefully, learning the layout of the property, the routines of Don Miguel, and the patterns that governed daily life at the homestead. Maria and Taya began to communicate cautiously. At first, it was only brief exchanges, careful words spoken when Don Miguel was away. Taya offered advice on keeping safe, suggesting small changes in routines that would make it harder for the outlaw to exert control. Maria listened intently, absorbing every word. She realized that she was not completely alone, that there was someone who understood the dangers she faced and had the skills to help her navigate them. As the days passed, Maria's trust in Ty grew. She felt a strange sense of comfort in his presence, even from a distance. Tay did not act out of arrogance or force. He moved with patience and respect, offering guidance without pressure. Maria felt a glimmer of hope that had been absent for months. The oppressive weight of fear began to lift slightly, replaced by a quiet determination to survive and one day reclaim her freedom. Meanwhile, Don Miguel continued to assert his control over the homestead. He gave instructions, demanded obedience, and watched Maria's every move. Yet Maria had grown wiser in his presence. She learned to act calmly, to follow his commands without showing fear, and to wait for opportunities that might allow her to escape or resist. The presence of Taye, even in secret, gave her courage she had not felt in months. She realized that she was not powerless, that with careful planning and the right support, she might find a way to protect herself and Isabella. Tay also studied Don Miguel carefully. He observed the outlaw's routines, noting moments of distraction and weakness. He understood that direct confrontation could be dangerous without preparation. Instead, he focused on gathering information, planning carefully, and waiting for the right moment to act. Taye's patience was a lesson for Maria. She learned that courage was not only in bold action but also in careful observation, in waiting for the right opportunity, and in protecting those you love through strategy and intelligence.
Over time, Maria and Taya developed a quiet rhythm of communication.
They would exchange small messages, gestures, and advice, always ensuring that Don Miguel remained unaware. Taya taught Maria subtle ways to safeguard her home and her daughter, giving her practical tools to survive while building her confidence. Maria felt her strength returning, not through force but through knowledge and careful planning. She realized that even in the darkest circumstances, wisdom and courage could create pathways to freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Tay spoke to Maria in a more serious tone. "I've seen enough," he said. "I know the danger you face, and I have a plan to help you. You must trust me and stay strong. Freedom is possible, but it will require patience, courage, and careful timing." Maria's heart raced. She had longed for help, for someone who could guide her through this nightmare, and now it seemed that hope had finally arrived. Maria felt the mixture of fear and relief. She knew that relying on Taya would be risky, but she also knew that she could not face Don Miguel alone. She had spent months surviving in fear, and the possibility of liberation filled her with cautious optimism. She promised herself that she would follow Tay's guidance, protect Isabella, and do whatever was necessary to regain control of her life. As the night settled over the homestead, Maria felt a strange sense of peace. The fear that had dominated her days was still present, but it was balanced by hope. She could imagine a future in which she and Isabella were safe, a future in which she could walk freely, care for her daughter without fear, and live without the constant shadow of Don Miguel looming over them. For the first time in months, Maria allowed herself to imagine freedom, guided by the wisdom and courage of Tay. The bond between Maria and Tay remained one of trust, respect, and careful observation. He never pressured her, never acted impulsively, and always considered her safety above all else. Maria realized that strength could come from partnership as much as from individual courage, and she drew on this knowledge to prepare herself for the challenges that lay ahead. She continued her daily chores, cared for Isabella, and observed Don Miguel's behavior, all while secretly preparing for the moment when freedom could be claimed. Each day, Maria felt her confidence grow. She began to see that survival was not just about enduring fear, but also about planning, observing, and acting strategically. She understood that Taye's presence offered not only protection but also guidance, helping her see the possibilities that had been hidden by months of oppression. The future, though uncertain, now seemed attainable, and Maria resolved to remain strong, patient, and vigilant. The winds of change had begun to stir in Maria's life. The quiet strength of Taye, his knowledge of the land, and his careful strategy offered a lifeline. Maria clung to this hope, recognizing that courage and intelligence could overcome even the greatest challenges. The days of fear and oppression were not yet over, but for the first time Maria felt that liberation was possible. She would wait, she would prepare, and she would act when the moment was right. And with Taya by her side, even from a distance, she knew she might finally reclaim the freedom that had been stolen from her. The morning air was crisp and quiet, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust from the surrounding desert. Maria awoke early, her heart restless with both fear and anticipation. The previous days had been filled with cautious hope, guided by Tay's advice, but today was different. Today, Tay had told her that the time for careful waiting had come to an end. A plan was in motion, and the freedom she had longed for was within reach. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she prepared breakfast, not out of weakness, but from the adrenaline of knowing that change was coming. Isabella played quietly nearby, unaware of the careful preparations her mother was making. Maria smiled at her daughter, trying to mask the tension that coiled like a snake in her chest. She wanted Isabella to remain calm, to feel safe despite the danger that had surrounded them for so long. The little girl's laughter was a balm to Maria's anxiety, a reminder of why she had endured months of fear and oppression. Today, Maria realized, was not just about survival. It was about reclaiming life, hope, and the future for both of them. From a distance, Taye observed the homestead, moving silently across the ridges and hills that surrounded the property. His eyes were sharp, scanning for any signs of Don Miguel or his men. He had spent days studying their patterns, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, and today he was ready to act. Taye knew that direct confrontation required precision and timing. The lives of Maria and Isabella depended not only on courage but also on strategy, patience, and careful execution. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced danger before, his presence unseen but powerful. Maria's heart leapt when she saw Tay appear at the edge of the property, signaling with a small wave. She knew it was the moment to act, and yet she felt a mixture of fear and hope. The plan had been carefully discussed. Taye would create a distraction, drawing Don Miguel and his men away from the house while Maria and Isabella slipped out to safety. Every detail had been considered, the terrain, the timing, and the movements of the outlaw. But even the best plans carried risk, and Maria could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. As the sun climbed higher, Taye moved closer, using the rocks and brush for cover. He carried no weapon for aggression but relied on skill, stealth, and knowledge of the land. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he raised a small whistle to his lips and blew a sharp, clear note. The sound carried across the homestead, alerting Maria that the moment had arrived. Her pulse quickened. She gathered Isabella, whispered words of courage into her ear, and prepared to leave the safety of the house. Don Miguel, who had been inspecting the animals, froze at the sound of the whistle. His eyes narrowed, scanning the hills and ridges as if he could see through the distance. Taya had chosen the perfect moment. The sun was high enough to illuminate the landscape, but low enough to create shadows for cover. The outlaw's attention shifted, and Maria knew it was time. She took Isabella's small hand in hers and stepped quietly toward the edge of the property, moving with deliberate caution. Taya created a diversion, calling out loudly from a ridge while throwing small stones to create noise and confusion. Don Miguel's men, distracted and uncertain, ran toward the sound, leaving the homestead less guarded. Maria and Isabella moved swiftly, following the path Taya had identified. Every step was measured, every movement intentional. Maria could feel the tension in her chest, but she focused on Isabella, on the small hand she held, and on the hope that they were finally moving toward safety. The terrain was rugged, with rocks and brush that made each step a challenge. Maria's heart pounded, and she felt every muscle tense with effort and fear. But she moved steadily, guided by Taya's signals and instructions. The path led them through a narrow ravine, hidden from Don Miguel's view, where the sounds of the homestead were muffled by the natural landscape. Maria whispered reassurances to Isabella, her voice calm even as her body trembled with adrenaline. She knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. As they neared the edge of the ravine, Don Miguel noticed their movement. He shouted, anger and surprise coloring his voice. Maria's heart leapt into her throat, but she did not falter. Taya had anticipated this moment, positioning himself strategically to intercept the outlaw and his men. Don Miguel's attempts to chase them were slowed by the uneven terrain, and Taya's presence created a barrier that forced the outlaw to reconsider his approach. Maria and Isabella moved past the danger, guided by the steady, silent hand of the warrior who had come to save them. The confrontation that followed was tense and dramatic but controlled. Taya used his knowledge of the land to his advantage, guiding Maria and Isabella to a hidden area while keeping Don Miguel distracted. The outlaw's frustration grew as he realized that his control over the homestead and its occupants was slipping. Taya did not act with anger or aggression. Instead, he relied on careful positioning, calm strategy, and the natural features of the landscape to neutralize the threat. Maria watched in awe and relief as the man who had become her protector faced the outlaw with quiet authority. Minutes stretched into hours, each one filled with careful maneuvering, until finally Don Miguel recognized that he had lost his advantage. The realization hit him with anger and fear, and he retreated, leaving the homestead and Maria's life behind. The tension in the air began to lift, replaced by a sense of relief that was almost overwhelming. Maria held Isabella close, tears filling her eyes, as she realized that the nightmare that had dominated her life for months was finally ending. Freedom was within their reach, and the oppressive weight of fear began to dissolve. Taya led Maria and Isabella further from the homestead, ensuring that they were safe from any potential pursuit. He guided them through a series of hidden paths, using his knowledge of the terrain to keep them concealed. Maria marveled at his skill and calmness, feeling a mixture of gratitude and awe. She had endured months of fear, isolation, and oppression, and now she was walking toward freedom, guided by a man who understood both courage and compassion. As the sun set and the landscape was bathed in golden light, Maria felt a sense of peace that she had not known for many months. She could see the horizon, the distant hills, and the open land that stretched before them. The feeling of being watched, of being controlled, had lifted, replaced by the comforting presence of Ty and the hope of a new beginning. Isabella skipped along beside her, laughing softly, unaware of the danger they had just escaped, but sensing the change in the atmosphere. They reached a small, secluded area where Taya felt they could rest safely for the night. Maria sat on a flat rock, holding Isabella in her lap, and finally allowed herself to exhale deeply. The tension that had gripped her body for months began to ease, replaced by relief and gratitude. She looked at Taya, who remained vigilant even in this moment of reprieve. and felt a deep sense of respect and trust. He had not only saved their lives but also restored their hope. As night fell, Maria reflected on the journey they had undertaken. She had faced fear, oppression, and uncertainty, yet she had endured. She had protected Isabella through courage, patience, and careful planning. And now, with Tay by her side, she had reclaimed a sense of safety and possibility. The experience had changed her, strengthening her resolve and deepening her understanding of courage, resilience, and the importance of support and guidance. The stars appeared in the clear desert sky, and Maria felt a quiet sense of wonder and gratitude. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with hope and possibility. She knew that challenges would continue to come, but she also knew that she had the strength, knowledge, and support to face them. The night was calm, and the gentle sounds of the desert were a soothing backdrop to the new chapter of her life that was beginning. Maria whispered softly to Isabella, promising that they would be safe and that a better life awaited them. Isabella smiled, her eyes bright with trust and innocence, and Maria felt a surge of determination. She had endured fear and oppression, but she had also survived and emerged stronger. The journey ahead would require continued vigilance, patience, and courage, but Maria was ready. She was no longer a passive victim of circumstance. She was a mother, a survivor, and a woman who had reclaimed her power. With Taya's guidance, Maria and Isabella prepared to move further from danger, knowing that their journey toward freedom and a new life was just beginning. The landscape, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now held the promise of possibility and hope. Maria's heart swelled with gratitude for the warrior who had come to their aid, and she silently vowed to honor the courage, skill, and compassion that had saved them. The night passed peacefully, and Maria felt a sense of safety and relief that was almost overwhelming. She knew that the ordeal was not entirely over, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. With Taya by their side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The darkness that had dominated their lives for months was lifting, replaced by light, hope, and the promise of freedom. The first light of dawn broke over the desert hills, casting a warm glow over the land. Maria sat quietly on a rock, watching Isabella play nearby, her small hands digging in the soft earth as if she were planting seeds of a future that had once seemed impossible. The events of the past week still lingered in Maria's mind, the fear, the oppression, the constant tension, but now they felt distant, like shadows fading with the rising sun. She had survived, and more than that, she had reclaimed her freedom. For the first time in months, Maria felt a calm certainty settle in her heart. Taya had stayed close, a silent guardian whose presence was both reassuring and comforting. He did not speak unless necessary, choosing instead to observe the land, watch over Maria and Isabella, and ensure that no danger threatened them again. Maria had come to understand the depth of his skill and wisdom, and she felt a profound gratitude for the guidance and protection he had provided. His calm, steady presence was a stark contrast to the chaos of Don Miguel, and Maria realized that she had learned a great deal from him about patience, courage, and the value of careful planning. The homestead, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now seemed alive with possibility. Maria walked among the animals, tending to them as she had always done, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Every small task, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, tending the garden, felt like an act of reclaiming life. She noticed the soft chirping of birds, the gentle rustle of the wind in the sagebrush, and the quiet hum of the earth around her. It was a reminder that even after hardship the world continued, and there was beauty to be found in small moments of peace and simplicity. Isabella ran to her mother, holding up a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the surrounding fields. "Look, Mama," she said, her eyes shining with pride and innocence. Maria smiled, kneeling to embrace her daughter. She felt a wave of warmth and hope wash over her. Isabella's joy was a beacon, a reminder that the future was not defined by fear or past trauma, but by the love, care, and attention she received. Maria promised herself that she would nurture that joy, protect it, and allow it to grow, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Taya joined them as the morning unfolded, offering practical advice for rebuilding and safeguarding the homestead. "The land is forgiving if you work with it," he said, his voice calm and measured. Plant wisely, protect what matters, and move forward with careful steps. Danger will always exist, but preparation and awareness make it less threatening. Maria listened intently, absorbing every word. She realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger, but also about cultivating strength, knowledge, and resilience. The lessons she had learned during the dark days with Don Miguel would guide her in building a new life. Over the next several weeks, Maria began to rebuild her home and her sense of security. She repaired fences, strengthened doors, and planted new crops in the small garden. Each act of work felt like an affirmation of her independence and strength. Tay provided guidance but allowed her to lead, encouraging her autonomy while ensuring that she and Isabella remained safe. Maria felt a renewed sense of confidence in her abilities and her judgment. She had survived fear and depression, and now she was taking deliberate steps to thrive. Beyond the physical rebuilding, Maria also focused on emotional healing. She spent time with Isabella, teaching her about the land, sharing stories of Thomas, and creating small traditions that would bring comfort and stability. They walked through the hills, collected water from the stream, and marveled at the beauty of the desert sky. Maria realized that healing was not instant. It was gradual, built through routines, connection, and small acts of joy. Each day offered opportunities to nurture hope, to strengthen bonds, and to reclaim the life that had once been threatened. Taye, too, was a part of this healing. His quiet strength and wisdom became a source of stability for Maria. They shared long conversations about survival, courage, and the importance of protecting what mattered most. Maria found herself opening up about her fears, her grief, and her hopes for the future. Taya listened without judgment, offering guidance, reassurance, and practical advice. Over time, Maria felt a bond of trust and respect deepen between them. She realized that courage could be found not only in facing danger but also in forming connections, seeking guidance, and allowing oneself to rely on another. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Maria and Ty worked together to repair a section of the fence that had been damaged during the winter winds. Isabella ran ahead, laughing as she chased a small rabbit through the sagebrush. Maria paused, watching her daughter's carefree joy, and felt a profound sense of peace. She turned to Taya, her eyes reflecting gratitude and admiration. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You have given us more than safety. You've given us hope." Taya nodded, his expression calm but warm. "It is not thanks I seek," he replied. "It is seeing you and your daughter safe and strong. That is enough." As the weeks turned into months, the homestead transformed into a place of security and stability. The crops flourished, the animals thrived, and Maria and Isabella's routines became predictable and comforting. Maria's confidence grew with each passing day, reinforced by the skills and wisdom she had learned from both Tomas and Taye. She felt capable, resilient, and prepared for whatever challenges might come. The shadow of fear that had once dominated her life had faded, replaced by determination, courage, and the promise of a new beginning. The bond between Maria and Tay also grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. Though their relationship had begun in the midst of danger and fear, it now blossomed into companionship and mutual understanding. They worked together to protect the homestead, shared stories of their pasts, and supported one another in the challenges of daily life. Maria realized that strength was not only in survival but also in connection, and she welcomed Tay's presence in her life as both a guide and a friend. One day, as they prepared a meal together, Maria reflected on how far they had come. The threat of Don Miguel had passed, and the days of constant fear were behind them. She thought of the lessons learned, the importance of patience, courage, observation, and careful planning, and realized that these lessons would guide her for the rest of her life. She had endured hardship, protected her daughter, and reclaimed her home. She had survived, and now she could truly begin to live. Isabella ran to Maria with a handful of wildflowers, her laughter echoing across the homestead. Maria embraced her daughter, feeling the warmth of life and love surrounding them. Taye joined them, watching the two with quiet pride and care. Maria understood that this moment, though simple, was the culmination of months of struggle and endurance. It was proof that courage, patience, and trust could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The days that followed continued in this spirit of rebuilding and renewal. Maria and Isabella's routines became a source of stability and comfort, while Tay's guidance ensured their safety and growth. Maria took time to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. From fear and oppression to hope and freedom, she understood that life could be harsh and unpredictable, but she also knew that resilience, courage, and support could create a future filled with possibility. As the sun set each evening, Maria would sit with Isabella and Taya, watching the desert sky turn shades of orange, pink, and purple. They spoke of dreams, of safety, and of the life they were building together. Maria felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that she had never known during the long months of fear. She had survived, she had protected her daughter, and she had reclaimed her life. The journey had been difficult, but it had also revealed the strength, courage, and hope that lived within her. In time, Maria realized that her life was no longer defined by fear or loss. She had faced the most challenging circumstances imaginable and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. She had learned the importance of courage, patience, and careful planning. She had discovered the value of trust, connection, and guidance. And most importantly, she had learned that even after darkness, there could be light, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. Maria, Isabella, and Taya stood together one evening, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. The land stretched endlessly before them, filled with possibility. Maria held Isabella close, feeling her heartbeat, and turned to Tay with gratitude in her eyes. The past months had tested them, challenged them, and shaped them, but now they could look forward to a life of freedom, safety, and hope. The darkness had passed, and a new chapter had begun, one filled with courage, resilience, and the promise of brighter days. With the homestead secure, the land thriving, and their hearts filled with hope, Maria and Isabella could finally breathe freely. They had endured fear, oppression, and uncertainty, but they had survived, reclaimed their lives, and discovered the strength within themselves. Taya remained by their side, a steadfast protector and companion, guiding them through the challenges of the future with wisdom and care. Together, they faced each day with courage, hope, and the knowledge that even after the darkest trials, life could be reclaimed, renewed, and filled with promise.